Hello again, everyone. I just wanted to go over the midterm, what's going to be on it, how it's going to work, really briefly. I just have it pulled up, so I'm going to just kind of go question by question and tell you guys a little bit about what content to really zero in on. First, I'll just do a quick review of what the format of the midterm is going to be like. It's a lot like the quizzes that you've been taking on Blackboard. It's 60 points total. It's just about, just under 30 questions. Let's see here. Yeah, it's 27 questions long, and it will be timed. Quizzes and homeworks, of course, haven't been timed up to this point, but once you start the midterm, you have an hour and a half to complete it. So you really do have to make sure that you do it in one sitting and that you're careful to not begin it in a time when you're in the middle of something that would interrupt your ability to work on it. I also would encourage you to try to do Monday's lecture and homework ahead of time so that you won't be in a major crunch to complete the midterm. And that way you'll also be familiar with some of the content from Monday's lecture, which will be on the midterm as well. So I'll just go over some of the material that you need to make sure that you're familiar with before you even embark on hitting the begin button on that midterm. So you'll need to know what a least squares regression line is. So you need to just understand how a regression line works, or what it represents essentially, which is from this Thursday's lecture. So definitely zero in on that. You should be familiar with all of the forms of sampling and know what those terms mean. So you should know what a probability sample is. You should know what a simple random sample is. You should know what a stratified random sample is. This is all stuff that will be covered on Monday's lecture. You should also recall how to calculate mean, median, and mode, and you should also think about what kinds of factors can influence those numbers. So for example, if you get a really extremely high outlier, that is going to increase your mean. And things like that. So you should try to have an understanding for, based on how those three things are calculated, which ones are affected by things like outliers and skewed samples and things like that. Again, all stuff covered when you originally learned that content. You should also, of course, know your independent and dependent variables. So if you're giving an explanation of a study, you should be able to identify what in that study is the independent or dependent variable. You should recall what ordinal, nominal, ratio, and interval variables are. Central tendency, again, mode, you should know how that differs, and you should recall what bimodal is. You should be able to, if you're given a couple of different variables in a list, to identify which ones are ratio variables, which ones are nominal variables, and things like that. If you're provided a sampling strategy, you should be able to identify what kind of sampling strategy it is. So whether it's random, whether it's stratified, whether it's a probability sample, or whether it's a convenience sample. And those terms are not mutually exclusive. You can have a convenient random sample, which again, you'll kind of brush up on these things when you hit that stuff on Monday's lecture. You should be able to interpret a correlation coefficient, both the strength and the direction of it, and you should be able to compute R squared, which again is just squaring the correlation coefficient. You should know what the difference is between a parameter and a population and a statistic, and all of those terms. You should also be able to differentiate a true experiment from an observational study or something using archival research, or something that is correlational, where there isn't anything being directly manipulated. You should also know what type 1 and type 2 errors are. Let's see here, what else? You should recall how to calculate probabilities. You should recall what a standard deviation is and what error is in regression. So recall that in regression, error is any point that doesn't actually fall on the prediction line. That just indicates a failure of the regression line to accurately predict exactly what the value would be. Even if it's not that far off, even if the value is not an outlier, if the regression line does not actually fall on an observed data point, that space in between the two, the line and the point, indicates some of the error that is inherent in that regression model. You should be able to interpret the y equals bx plus a regression formula, so you should be able to identify that y is the dependent variable, that x is the independent variable, that a is the intercept when x equals 0, that's what y is, and you should be able to identify b as the slope, which indicates, you know, a change in b has this, a change in x has this effect on y. So if you're given a regression equation with the numbers in it, you should be able to pick out what number represents the slope or the intercept, and things like that. You should know the difference between multiple regression and simple linear regression, and the difference there is the number of predictors, the number of x variables. You should also know what are the possible values for a correlation coefficient. So recall that it ranges from -1 to +1. It can never be greater than either of those things in terms of absolute value. So you could not have a correlation coefficient of -2 or +2 or something like that. You should be able to identify the slope of a line in regression. So again, that's the b, that's the slope of the line. So y equals bx plus a, the b is the slope. And you should also be able to compute very basic linear regression results. So if you're given y equals 2 times x plus 3, you should be able to plug in an x value and calculate what the predicted y is there. You'll never have to do anything with multiple regression, where you have to calculate for several different x's, but you should be able to just plug in one x and get the correct answer there. So that's essentially what the questions are and the topics that you'll have to be worrying about when you do the midterm. I just want to quickly correct myself. I said that you would need to know the difference between type 1 and type 2 errors, and that's actually not true. That's after the midterm, so you can disregard that. And I'll also make a note when I send this video out that you do not need to know type 1 and type 2 errors. So you can disregard that. I know I said that a minute or two ago. Otherwise, that's essentially it. Make sure that you're comfortable understanding what a regression line is and what it represents. Make sure you remember all the terms that you've already had to learn earlier on in this class. And in terms of calculation, you should be able to calculate a probability, which I know you can already do. Calculate y if given a really simple regression equation. And you should be able to calculate r squared. And that's pretty much it, as well, and mean, median, and mode, of course. So this is all basically pretty simple stuff that you've already demonstrated the ability to do, but just make sure that you recall it and are comfortable doing it before you hit that begin button. So yeah, so that's all that's going to be on the midterm. If you have any questions, just let me know. I encourage you to use the stats discussion board on Blackboard, because then if you have a question that a lot of other people have, maybe they can help chip in, or at the very least my answer can help those other people as well, and that can just make being confused a little bit less of an isolating experience. So as we move into some of these harder concepts, I know I've been emphasizing this a lot, but I'll just say it again. Definitely read the supplementals or watch any videos that I attach, because videos really make it a lot easier to understand a lot of these concepts, and that's really the most difficult thing that's lacking in a class like this that has that's completely online. So definitely, if you have any trouble with any concepts, look at any videos I've posted or emailed, but also consider doing a YouTube search as well, and just try to visualize the information in as many different ways possible, and read the textbook, read the lecture, and watch the videos, and together all of those things should help to start it make sense. But if not, don't hesitate to contact me or post on the discussion board, and yeah, hopefully that'll help fill in any gaps and clarify any confusion. Yeah, so let me know, and I'll see you around.